What if I told you this $1,000 piece of 3D printed metal could be the secret sauce that can help make a car sound, well, exotic? Today we're diving headfirst into exhaust witchcraft. We're swapping our proven FMU X-Pipe for a Formula Z buzzworthy Zpipe, and then pitting them both on the dyno, but why stop there? We'll throw in a set of stepped headers because the flat plane Voodoo V8 can't scream exotic with a megaphone and a crossover doesn't even have a soul. If you've ever wondered whether a Zpipe can truly transform a vehicle's voice or if it's just marketing hype, well, you're about to find out. In this video, we'll be testing 4 setups. FMU's original X-Pipe system as the baseline, FMU's system with the added Zpipe, Cook's step headers with FMU's X-Pipe, and Cook's stepped headers with the Zpipe and FMU system. And yes, we're running all of that, just like Bastier's How F1 Sound is Made video lays out. You'll see raw dyno data, unfiltered sound clips, and find out what exactly changes, good or bad, happen when you throw every exotic sounding exhaust trick in the book at a platform that can possibly get it to happen. For anyone new to the flat plane life, the 2017 Mustang Shelby GT rocks a Ford 5.2 V8 with a flat plane crank, nicknamed the Voodoo. It revs like a firecracker, but compared to a F430 or a McLaren V8, it lacks that razor-sharp wail. Our FMU X-Pipe gave it character, but it still played it safe. Enter the Formula Z and their 3-inch Zpipe, rumored to optimize scavenging and sculpt an otherworldly tone. In the last video on this car, we featured this 2017 Mustang Shelby GT350, where we went ahead and installed our FMU X-Pipe system, but kept the headers stock and it had the megaphones in place. And on the dyno, the numbers looked pretty strong, but the sound, it was unmistakably Mustang, yet it still lacked that flat, plain scream that I had envisioned. And after filming, I pulled the owner aside and said, I love what we did, but those stock headers are throttling this Voodoo's voice. We both felt that itch for more, but neither of us expected to explore it so soon. Then, almost serendipitously, Formula Z slid into our DMs and they liked our style. They asked if we would consider a collab, and admittedly, they weren't expressly targeting this GT350, but the universe lining up on my quest to perfect a 5.2 V8 note with the chance to test the Zpipe, I couldn't pass that up. So I pitched to the owner, we'll buy the pipe on our dime, test it, and if you like it, you can cover the parts only cost. Now, considering that the Zpipe runs nearly 3 times what our X-Pipe costs, that doesn't include install or labor. It's pretty much a sweet offer, but his response was, let's do it big. Like, by the way, the stepped headers are on the way big. People have been saying stepped headers are the secret sauce for that F1 style scream ever since that viral exhaust video blew up online. And in my previous rant, I pointed out that it's not just headers, it's the engine itself. If the engine itself can't sync up its cam profiles and firing pulses with the acoustics built into the cylinder head design, you're never gonna hit that exotic pitch. Some viewers blame the firing order, and then others blame the megaphone, but most insisted that stepped headers were the answer. So, this flat plane V8 didn't find its exotic voice with an X-Pipe and megaphone, which I used to refine the tone, not guarantee an F1 scream. Then surely the Zpipe, the stepped headers, or both should finally crack the F1 puzzle, right? So maybe you didn't watch our last video and you're unfamiliar with what we actually did the first time through. So let's go over it real quick so I can catch you guys up. Now, starting from the factory headers, you'll see we basically have a down pipe in place with a flex pipe here that essentially replaces some area compliant emissions devices. Now keep in mind, this is for testing and video creation purposes only. So if you see something missing there, that's just what that's about. Now, here's where things get a little tricky and what we had to do before we even started filming. This X-Pipe, which you might recognize, the similar design to what we use all the time, had to go in place for us to be able to swap this quickly in and out, meaning that the Zpipe had to take up the same amount of space here to here, so that way all we had to do was unbolt this, pop it back in place. But as you could probably tell, there's a lot of V-bands in that area, 4 in total, which means the complexity and added cost for us to just be able to do this, to test quickly, went up a lot more than we typically see in our system. However, that does make this very easy to swap over when it comes time to testing. You guys will see that in a little bit. But our Zpipe right into the megaphones. Now, the reason we went with the megaphones after the Zpipe is because I was trying to amplify the crossover of the two banks after the merge. So while it might not be that important, and typically I'll tell people you want the megaphones closer to the headers, we also knew that headers might be in the future for this car, and we didn't want to put megaphones in that area because depending on what headers you go with, they come down more into this area, and that would completely change the design and it'd be a lot more working with. So that's why the megaphones are a little bit further back than we typically run them. But right to the rear here, you'll see another set of V-bands, which goes into a true Y dual canister setup. And that dual canister setup is a little bit interesting. What you'll notice is we've got 2 modes here, a valved, using the factory valves, and if you guys remember, we had a little trouble with that, using the factory valves straight through. But then what we use to control exhaust drone is stepping this portion down and then going to a more restrictive resonated muffler going through here. So this in this case is 2 1/4, and this in this case is 2 1/2. So that way, when it does shut it down, it's really truly making this car livable, drivable, not a pain in the butt. But what does all this sound like if you guys don't remember? Well, let's hear it. All right, so we're getting the initial baseline dyno done with our system and our Zpipe. 462 is where we were at, and 463 is our best. Before, when the car came in, we were at 425. So you can see that between those few months, we are more or less right where we were at, which is going to be perfect for trying to make sure we measure the difference, because it could be minuscule between the Zpipe and our pipe. It could be, you know, substantial. We're not sure, but we want to make sure that our numbers are matching where the car was at, that it's not wildly higher or wildly lower today, and it's dead on. So what we're going to try to do is get this off, get that Zpipe on there, and then get it right back on here, same day, same conditions, so that way we can see if this makes more of a difference than just the sound. Maybe we'll get a little performance out of it. And here it is, the Formula Zpipe as fitted, ready to be swapped into place. Like I was telling you guys before, the main idea here is that we have this V-banded in a way that's going to allow us to rapidly throw this thing in and out. You guys might be curious, how does this work? What is exactly going on here? Let's start with which way this is flowing. Now, this is the 3-inch classic setup, and what the classic setup means is that you more or less have a straight through design, where some of their other ones have a more canted angle coming out, and then still other setups have a setup meant for cars with either rear engine or mid-engine, where they cross over from these two planes going to this way. So more or less what they effectively do is using the ability to 3D print, which is going to give you the opportunity to have tighter, finer angles in how these merges happen. You are essentially crossing over one bank with the opposite bank. So you have this crossing over from here to here, and this bank crossing over from here to here, merging both of those. In Formula Dynamics claims that it will optimize scavenging more so than traditional methods. I think there's some validity to that claim. I mean, if you look at this merge here, it's pretty interesting. You can see how that crosses over, and you can imagine if you've ever played with Venturis or anything along those lines, having airflow move past another opening can pull more airflow along, reducing the pressure inside of the exhaust, maybe helping out the exhaust pulses. So it's pretty interesting. Definitely something I've been dying to try since I first saw it. And in all of our years of experimenting with different types of X-pipes, I've learned that this 45-degree angle, where you're not having a true 90-degree straight on, the way it kind of passes over, tends to have the cleanest of all of the tones. Anytime you have a 90-degree angle where it's popping over one side, I always say it's like a bottle. You know, you fill it up with water, you can make musical instruments. Well, if it's crossing over at a 90, it seems to just create a different, weirder, more dirty, unclean tone. So in our experimenting, this is the X that I've settled on, the one that may not be best for power, but it's the best blend of sound, power, performance. You kind of get a good mix of everything. There's crossovers I've thought about making, and I think Borla sells one called a Switchfire or a Crossfire, something along those lines. Quote me in the comments of which the name of that pipe is, but it's something kind of similar. However, it's tubular, so it would be a little bit bulkier. This is nice and smooth. They can crush these angles to kind of keep the profile low to be able to fit it into a car. So I'm dying to hear how this thing sounds. Let's get Cody to swap it in and see what it actually does. All right, first impressions on the Zpipe on our system, which was a big question for me. I wanted to know if what I was hearing in a lot of the videos, because I'll be honest, the videos where it was exotics, some of those exotics have great tones to begin with, and they used them on these exotic cars. And while there was a substantial difference on these cars, I could still hear something in the tone, but it still sounded really good, sounded really unique, and I liked it. When it came to more ordinary cars, I noticed Corvettes, various Mercedes, things along that line. The tone again was substantially different, but there was a certain buzz inside of the system, and my thoughts went to, is that buzz indicative of the Zpipe, or is it actually part of the system? Because people don't really build exhaust systems the way we do to mitigate those sorts of occurrences. I will say, it's definitely got a more high-strung, race-bred tone quality to the exhaust note, even over our system. I kind of like this. This is definitely different than our typical X-pipe, but I do hear some, and I don't know if you can pick up on this, but there's definitely a little bit more metallic, almost buzz quality to the exhaust. My thoughts are is that sharp angle that's inside of that diversion, possibly cutting into the sound pulse a little bit. Again, I'm just a mechanic, and most of the stuff we know is based off of us trying and testing various different components in all of our builds over the years, all of the manufacturers' X-pipes, until we decided that what we liked and what we used. But the Zpipe is new tech, and it's always great to see what's out there and what can be pushing the limits. But what I want to know is, this thing definitely sounds closer to that flat plane race vibe that we're going for, but we can go bigger. Let's go bigger. Let's do the stepped headers. Let's test again, and let's see if we can get this thing to really wail. All right, so we had talked about it, and a lot of people had mentioned that these headers are not a great design from the factory, and really just take a look at them up here. If you see, we've got all sorts of crazy merges, all sorts of lengths, all sorts of curves. But is it ideal? No. And is it ideal for sound? No. A lot of things they use in here that I just would never touch. Basically a right angle merge out of cylinders. I mean, just a lot of weird transitions and things meeting up that I know for a fact won't sound ideal. Now, Ford doesn't really have to worry about how good these things sound out of there. They've still got catalytic converters, resonators, mufflers, and then a valve section to control the rest of that. And they still have noise regulations and emission regulations. So they're not concerned in the same way that we are about getting the ultimate sound profile from the car. And here they are, the stepped headers. Now, there's really only two brands available. One of them being the Cooks, the other one's, I believe, Stainless Works. And what we have here for less than $2,500, we have a 3/4 to 7/8 stepped header in stainless steel. Stainless steel is a non-negotiable for us. If these don't work, because everyone says that stepped headers are going to be the key to getting a higher pitch, higher volume tone out of this engine. If they don't work, people will say, oh, it's not a big enough step. This is what's available, and we're not about to reinvent the wheel. It's very time consuming to build headers for a car. You know, these are $2,500, and if you think about it, for us to take the engine down, map something, model it out, cut the metal, I mean, we'd be talking about almost 2 weeks plus. That's on labor. And that doesn't equate out to what you could get something that already has the R&D developed into it that is aggregated across the price of multiple units. So it would probably end up costing a company like us $7,000 or $8,000 to build a set of headers. Unless there's nothing else out there available, it's not something I'd recommend for your typical customer. If there's something out there that does the job, then let's get it. And that's what the customer did. Stepped headers, these are going on, and I can't wait to see if they finish this thing off and make it sound that the way we're all hoping this thing should sound. All right, the stepped headers are in, and all we have left now is for Cody to fabricate the pipes that go to the removable section so we can continue the test. Although it sounds simple, it's easier said than done, but let's try to get this done so you guys can see if this actually makes a difference. But before we do that, we've got open headers right now. Why don't we hear how it sounds? Was really loud. Let's see if we can get that a bit under control, but there's definitely something there to it. So hopefully with our system and the two pipes switching back and forth, we can finally figure out, can we get this thing to sound more exotic? All right, the Zpipe is in, and admittedly, it might have been easier to get it off the dyno and then back on and strap it down rather than dealing with it the way we did underneath the car. But we got it, and we're gonna get it ran, see what it does, listen to see if it makes a sound difference, but just as importantly, does it make a performance difference? Now, when you guys see this video all wrapped up, you guys are gonna see 4 dyno runs. And while we do have 4 conclusive numbers here, we had to run this thing again and again and again and again because I just wasn't believing what I was seeing. Now, I wish I had a better outcome for this because this is probably gonna get people kind of riled up, but we have some very close numbers with the headers, without, with the Zpipe, and without. I have this zoomed in, so hopefully you guys can see ultimately when all's said and done, the Formula Z Zpipe picks up 3 horsepower over our Smooth Merge X, which I'd say that's pretty substantial. You know, it's noticeable. Is it worth the price? It depends on if you like the sound, but it does seem to add a increased scavenging effect over a traditional X-pipe, and it adds something to the exhaust node. However, I would say that's one of those preferences that you're going to have to decide if you like better or not. Personally, I like the X-pipe, but that Formula Z does give it a little bit of a more high-strung sound. So I can see the use case for using this, maybe not necessarily the GT350, but you know, there are cars that might benefit from this, and if you have it in there, you know that you're going to be getting the most optimal exhaust scavenging. However, there's more to these numbers. Now, 465, 468, what do we see here in this mid-range from 48, 5,000 up until what we're seeing is an actual power loss over the Smooth Merge X. And we've got a little bit more peak at the top end here, but it kind of more or less follows the same line in the same exhaust system. So in reality, you're losing a little power with maybe the gain of a little bit at the top end for the sound over the traditional X-pipe that we happen to build here. But the real surprising part are the headers. The stepped headers over the factory manifolds just didn't show peak gains that I was kind of expecting. Now keep in mind, this is a race-bred Ford engine, naturally aspirated, so even though those headers look funky, they are pulling about as much flow as they can out of them. However, the peak numbers aren't the whole story. Again, you have to look further into the numbers. These two right here, the Zpipe and our X-pipe, again, you can see our X-pipe makes more down low than the blue line in the Zpipe, but then the Zpipe takes over up top. So it would appear that more torque, more low end is made with the traditional X-pipe than the Zpipe, but then you can, at the high end, you pick up additional scavenging. So that is definitely a plus. But the numbers, you know, 23 horsepower at 6,300, which is pretty substantial, and that's where you're seeing this. But as far as peak to peak versus, it's 5 horsepower. Peak to peak, with the Formula Z piped in the stepped headers, 8 horsepower, which really isn't that impressive for what you're spending for the headers. Now, here's the thing though, just because we slap these headers on there doesn't mean we necessarily tune to take advantage of them. A lot of times you can run a tune a little bit differently. Maybe the additional flow helps to allow you to run a little bit more timing, cool the cylinders a little bit better. The air-fuel ratio can be ran a little bit differently to peak power out. Dialing in this custom tune a little bit further may yield additional gains. And if you were doing anything that would change that, such as you know, other mods that might increase airflow, or if you had a boosted car, the headers would really shine and take advantage of the increased cylinder pressure from the boost going in there. So you'd probably see additional gains there. But at this stage in time, before we've really dialed in the custom tune for this car, you know, there's definitely something to be said about, especially with our system in the 23 horsepower in the mid-range at 6,300, but 18 and 8, it's kind of hard to justify it for that price. But if you want your car to sound like no other GT350, having the stepped headers and having the Formula Z pipe would be the ultimate answer. And that way you know that you are leaving nothing on the table with your exhaust flow. And I can safely say that the only thing we got left is to hear the final version of the stepped headers and the Z pipe. Let's get it outside. want to hear from you guys. What was your favorite setup? And have we finally answered the question if stepped headers can actually make a car sound like a Formula One car? Now, as far as the Zpipe goes, hopefully this video has given you guys enough information that if you want to go out and purchase the Zpipe with the purpose of trying to enhance your exhaust system, you have a pretty good idea of what it's capable of. That's a wrap for this video, but we've got lots more content coming up in the future, so make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and drop us a comment. But as always, stay loud, stay curious, and we'll see you soon.